Okay, so learning about the mind, understanding the mind, not just intellectually but experientially, is extremely important for our daily happiness, our future happiness, and the fulfillment of our wishes to overcome our suffering and so forth. How can we understand this? So I mentioned this in last night's class, the foundation program, but yesterday, during the day, I was teaching a whole bunch of primary school students, little ones. Is beginning back to teaching them their weekly class, the meditation class, and I was explaining to them that over the last few months they have learned many things about protecting themselves from sickness such as COVID-19, coronavirus. And so I asked them, what methods have they learnt to protect themselves, to protect their body from becoming sick? And they came up with a whole list of different things, such as washing their hands, keeping distance, and so on. So it was obvious that they'd been watching the news and they got all the updates. But we need to remember that there are two parts of ourself, our body and our mind. The coronavirus, for example, affects only the body. It's very, very important to understand this, because coronavirus is a physical sickness. Therefore, it affects the physical. And so to prevent us from being infected by it, we take precautions such as washing our hands. Our mind is a very different thing. It's not a physical thing. It's a formless continuum. It suffers from, well, we can say, it has a different type of sickness. It's what we call an inner sickness. Inner sickness of the delusions which give rise to the experience of suffering. Simply washing our hands will not prevent us from experiencing inner sickness. No amount of hand sanitizer will prevent anger from developing, will control our uncontrolled desire, will destroy our jealousy. It doesn't matter what distance we keep from other people, it will not prevent us from experiencing social anxiety. Because these sufferings come from inside ourselves, not from outside ourselves. So therefore, the solution to the inner problem needs to be implemented, established within our own mind. So I think it's very clear. Wash your hands to prevent coronavirus. Practice the Dharma to protect us from the inner sickness of the delusions and the suffering that ensues from the manifestation of those delusions. Two different problems, outer problem and an inner problem. And so this is why this book, for example, the contents of it, what it's called in Tibetan, Lorig instructions, means understanding the mind instructions are supreme for curing ourselves of inner sickness. Now, of the two, inner sickness is far worse than outer sickness. This we need to understand very, very clearly, because as we can see, especially in the media these days, there's a lot of attention being paid to outer sickness. But even before this pandemic, there's always been a pandemic of inner sickness. And so I just read on the internet the other day, an ex-footballer, 38-year-old, suicides, not because of outer sickness, but because of inner sickness. From the point of view of his external life, he had everything, but from the point of view of what was in his heart, the inner sickness of the delusions and the suffering that came from that. He couldn't bear that. So his solution to that is to cease his life. But even ceasing our present life will not cease the inner sickness of the delusion. It will not stop us experiencing suffering. Therefore, we can see from this explanation so far the importance of understanding our own mind. Not for the purpose of merely understanding it from an intellectual point of view, so we can talk about it to other people, but to be able to control our mind. We need to be able to control and finally eradicate our delusions, which is the source of all of our suffering, the source of our repeated rebirths in samsara, the source of, we can say, even outer sickness. Even outer sickness can be traced back to inner sickness. So without curing ourselves of inner sickness, then the problem of mental suffering and physical pain will continue without end. For as long as our mind is in union with delusion, then our suffering has no end. So it's for this reason that we must understand our mind. Not merely, or not simply, just keep social distancing. That's not going to solve our human problems, if we check. How many people do you know that at present are experiencing a lot of anxiety with respect to outer sickness, isolation, and so on? I know people who are so worked up about the pandemic that they can't even enjoy whatever life they have left because the inner sickness is preventing them from experiencing enjoyment. They are wearing a mask, they're washing their hands, they're cleaning the surfaces, but they have no control over their mind. And so therefore, no quality of life. We need to deeply contemplate and meditate on these points so that we develop a determination to dedicate the rest of our life to curing ourselves of the inner sickness of our delusions and dedicating our life to helping other people to also identify this inner sickness, help them to learn how to overcome this inner sickness. So that's a little bit of context. And that's why a book like this is extremely precious. Whereas books that explain how to use a smartphone are not so precious. They're useful, but they're not precious. These are precious because they help us to solve our actual problem. Not merely how to download an app that we don't necessarily need. So, as I have explained in previous weeks, the mind can be divvied up into many different ways. Okay, it can be